Time for another episode of The Fine Year, where I review the big year I made in 2019 and everything turns out fine. This time it's March, where I made my second trip of the year down to Florida. And I didn't even have you then. You were just a wish. Enjoy. March started off with a bang as a rough was reported down at the end of Arnold Road in Oxnard. I had to wait an hour or two for it to come out of hiding, but finally I saw those bright orange legs and I knew I had my bird. After that, it was off to Lancaster, where I was hoping to find the LeConte's thrasher. I didn't find the thrasher, but I did see quite a number of Bell's sparrows singing, so that was good. I also found this flock of feeding snow geese, preparing to head back north, I presume. Early in the month, I joined a birding trip to Santa Cruz Island, home of the island scrub jay. Trips to the island are made regularly out of Ventura Harbor, but I wanted to go early to catch some of the pelagic birds that might be a little hard later in the year. The brown pelican isn't hard, though. They're around all the time, breeding on Anacapa. This pelagic cormorant was one I really wanted to see this trip. I wanted to see one with the breeding white mark just behind its wing, just so there's no doubts. California has 3 cormorants typically, pelagic, brants, and most commonly the double-crested. Sometimes neotropic cormorants stray here. I also wanted to see a few alcids on this trip, such as this Scripps murrelet. We came across several common murres as well, though they were not yet in breeding plumage. One final one that was seen but not photographed by me is the Cassin's auklet. I missed most of them, but finally saw the last one. Of course, here's the real prize of the trip, the island scrub jay. This is the only place they are found. They hid for quite a while, over an hour, almost 2, but at last we found one just before we had to cast off to come back. Back on the mainland at Sycamore Canyon, I found this Nanday, also known as black-hooded, parakeet. I'm not sure if they're really countable on the official ABA list, but I count them as I'm sure they're breeding here. There's quite a number. A non-birding exciting event that happened in March was the huge migration of painted lady butterflies from the deserts of Mexico and Southern California north to Oregon, Washington, Canada, and even Alaska. Estimates ranged from millions to over 1 billion. And personally, I believe the billion number. Every day outside, you would just see them constantly. On my regular spring trip to Joshua Tree National Park, I made a stop at Big Morongo Canyon State Park and was surprised to find these cedar waxwings out in a desert-ish habitat at one of the water features. One of the more common birds at Joshua Tree is the black-throated sparrow. They are easy to find as they sing, I guess preparing to nest. This phainopepla at Joshua Tree was also carrying nesting material. The males are black with white flashes on their wings as they fly, and the females are gray. Of course, no trip to Joshua Tree is complete without seeing a cactus wren. About mid-month, I was off to Florida. My first stop was Green Cay Wetlands, which is in Boynton Beach near the Loxahatchee Wildlife Refuge. They have long walkways through a marsh filled with herons, egrets, and gallinules. This gray-headed swamp hen caught my attention as it was a lifer for me. It's another invasive. I'm not sure it's countable by the ABA, but it's countable by me. Green Cay is heavily visited by the local residents, a lot of senior walkers doing the boardwalk. As a result, the birds seem to be very accustomed to people. I was able to get good photos of a number of species, such as these gallinules, common and purple. Another fun bird for me at Green Cay was the little blue heron. These seem to be a southeastern bird to me. Unlike most other herons and egrets, I have not seen these here in California. I had seldom seen the white immature form, So this one with the mottled plumage was interesting. The one posing in a dead snag was also pretty. These two birds were ones I had seen before, but only from a distance. Here at Green Cay, they were up close, ignoring the passers-by. The roseate spoonbill was in the weeds and too busy feeding to pose well, but the wood stork was more out in the open. The reeds were quite tall there, giving the birds a nice habitat and presumably a feeling of safety. Blackbirds were well represented at Green Cay by the boat-tailed grackle and the red-winged blackbird. The red-winged blackbird was putting on quite the display, flaring his epaulets to make sure everyone knew he owned that particular patch of turf. Here's a smallish bird that's often hard to photograph, much less see, the least bittern. Most of the ones I've seen previously have been real skulkers, hiding deep in the weeds, perhaps emerging briefly for a quick stab at some food item before slinking back into cover. Unlike the bittern, this tricolored heron was out in the open pursuing its prey. It was putting on quite the dance, stirring things up in an attempt to find some small fish or other tasty aquatic goodie for breakfast. One iconic bird to see in Florida, here in an iconic pose, is the anhinga. Green Cay held several, but this one, drying his wings after fishing for his breakfast, was picturesque in particular. I can't resist dropping another photo of a blue-winged teal into this presentation, even though I think I showed one earlier in the year from California. It turned out to be a good year for them. I took photos of them in several states. I just like them. This pair of pileated woodpeckers was stationed on a tree not very far down the boardwalk at the Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. They were so close, I practically had to creep by at a snail's pace to keep from flushing them. They really seemed more interested in each other, however. At Loxahatchee, I got this limpkin as my first USA area limpkin. I'd seen one earlier in the year in Mexico, as you may recall, and even one several years back in the Dominican Republic. The red-shouldered hawks I saw in Florida were noticeably lighter than the ones I'd seen when I lived in Alabama, and much lighter than the ones we see here in California. It was nesting season for them in Florida, and this is one of several nests I saw. Another bird I saw in multiple locations this year was the sandhill crane. The ranger at Loxahatchee pointed out this nest to me after he had seen me photographing the hawk's nest. Palm warblers have always been one of my favorite spring birds ever since I lived in Alabama, as they were among the first migrants passing through in the spring. They are very active and somewhat easier to see than many warblers, as they hop along the ground gleaning insects instead of hiding out at the tip-top of the trees. This rabbit startled me in the evening at Loxahatchee. I'd never seen a bunny with such short ears before. I looked it up online, and it turned out to be a marsh rabbit. That made perfect sense, considering the habitat I was in. This pretty catbird put in an appearance at Jonathan Dickinson State Park, where I had gone to hunt for Florida scrub jays. The scrub jays were hiding out when I first searched the area of the park where they were known to inhabit, so I moved closer to the woods and found the catbird. In addition to the catbird, I found a few other birds that I used to see annually when I lived in Alabama. This great-crested flycatcher caught my attention with its familiar wheep call, and this red-bellied woodpecker was not shy either. Besides the scrub jay, I was looking for another possibly tricky-to-find bird at Jonathan Dickinson, the brown-headed nuthatch. Even in Alabama, they're sort of hit and miss. I didn't have a for certain spot for them. Several years, though, we did have pairs that nested in our yard. One Alabama bird I only miss a little in California is the mockingbird. I say only little because we do have them in California, but they don't seem to overrun suburbia as they have in Alabama. I see them, but I seldom see them singing. In Alabama, their full vocal talents were on display most days. We even had one there that could mimic the civil defense siren. At last, here it is, the Florida scrub jay. I finally found it on the trail set aside for mountain biking. Now I have two on my hoped-for grand slam of scrub jays. Luckily, there was a low biker turnout that day. I went to the Babcock-Webb Wildlife Management Area mostly to find red-cockaded woodpeckers and get a photo of one. I found the woodpeckers, but no photo, nor did I get a photo of the 1,000 or so Bachman sparrows I heard. I did get some photos of some more common birds, though, such as this eastern meadowlark. I got my first alligator picture in Florida at Babcock-Webb. It was a good reminder to pay close attention to the water. I moved on to Cypress Swamp in the afternoon. I enjoyed that park immensely, perhaps because they had a sign on the boardwalk asking visitors to be quiet and not carry on unnecessary conversation. Many places could use such signs. The birds seemed a little less shy there, including this white-eyed vireo. Here is something that I did not want to see particularly close up. It is a water moccasin, known in the South as a cottonmouth. It was several feet below the boardwalk, so there was no danger for me as it took its siesta. After a couple days, I moved to a hotel in Homestead to better access the Everglades and points south. Near the hotel, there's a spot called Frog Pond, also known as Lucky Hammock. This spot was just a small stand of trees in a meadow, but it was teeming with warblers and other good birds when I stopped by. Here's a Tennessee warbler I saw there. I lost count of the prairie warblers I saw in Florida. They apparently winter there, and many additional ones may have been staging during migration. Palm and prairie warblers were both extremely numerous that whole trip. Two other warblers nearly as common were northern parulas and yellow-throated warblers. Not quite as numerous as prairies or palms, but I still saw many and had good chances for photographs. Finally, I had made it to the Everglades. On the Anhinga Trail, it was natural for me to find nesting anhingas. The chicks aggressively fought over the meals their parents brought them. The pools along the Anhinga Trail were full of turtles, alligators, and fish, all of which could be seen from the road or boardwalk. I trust this soft-shelled turtle was watching out for alligators as closely as I was. This great white heron was fascinating to watch as it caught a rather large gar. It didn't eat it right away, but carried it around as if it was hiding it from me. I walked away from it, then turned back and watched it as it crossed the walk and went into the brush. I assumed it must be heading for its nest. Most consider this a subspecies of the great blue, but I was glad to see it for its own sake. I found this northern water thrush on one of the Everglades trails, among all the prairie and palm warblers. I'd been searching for a black-throated blue warbler unsuccessfully, so that will have to wait for another day. I made my way to Key West, where I visited Fort Zachary Taylor the day before my trip to the Dry Tortugas. This was a great spot, as evidenced by this Cape May warbler. Of course, when you go to Florida, you've got to get a photo of a laughing gull. I expected to see many of those during the year, but it was nice to start with some sharp-looking birds. Here are my totals through March. I was up to 281 fine-year birds altogether, but still only 13 lifers. I'm going to have to do better. We'll have to see if I hit the wall in April.